briefly tell you what brought me, what was the path to work on the Andolan, because as Gurpreet told you, I am my focus, my specialization is the Sikh diaspora in Europe. So, as he told you, I am from France, I am an anthropologist, and I am specialized in the study of Sikh and Punjabi diaspora and migration patterns to Europe. And for the past 20 years now, I have been looking at several aspects of that topic. So, one of the major topic I have been looking at are Sikhs in the UK, so British Sikhs. You must be aware of the Turban campaign that they have fought and successfully fought. And I have been looking at Sikh identity construction process in the UK. So that's one thing that occupied me for a number of years. But since I was in France and there was a small but growing Sikh community, then I started looking at French Sikhs, studying French Sikhs, and particularly looking at the institutionalization process of the French Sikh community through the study of the main Gurdwara, which is Singh Sabha Gurdwara in Paris, and how through this institutionalization process, through the management, the construction and the management of a place of worship, how French Sikhs have encountered French secularism, which is called laïcité, as you know. So that's another strand of my research. Third strand of research, which has now occupied me till I joined Jindal, which was really occupying me the most, was looking at the impacts of the closure of borders in Europe and of stringent European migration policies. So the impact on the lives of Sikh migrants in Paris, particularly irregular migrants. So I've been very much researching on that, doing interviews, a few publications on this aspect, which is, interestingly, irregular migration is an understudied topic in this otherwise very vibrant academic field of Sikh diaspora. And it is an understudied field, and I think it's very important to study that because it's a major trend. I mean, as you know, it has become a major trend of Sikh migration and mobility patterns to the West. So I have in particular looked at the, how their irregular status, how their, underground life, if I might say, impacts on the construction of those Sikh migrants' masculinity. So the relation between irregular status and masculinity has been something I have been interested in. Gender, but gender doesn't only mean, studying women migrant. It also means studying men migrant. So that's a third strand of research. And a fourth strand of research has been, and that's when I got in touch, that's why I got in touch originally some years ago with the Institute of Sikh Studies, because I was working at the time, and I'm planning to work again also, on Sikh responses and Sikh responses to and relations with Hindutva and RSS, as well as connecting that with Sikh minority status in India as well as in the West. So that's, to put a broader perspective, to give you a broader perspective of what I have been interested in researching. And as you can see from my presentation, from my introduction, I am not a specialist at all of agrarian issues. I am, struggling with the agrarian understanding, the agrarian economy, agrarian distress, and so on, and all that. But I actually became interested in the Andolan because of the Sikh dimension, because of the religious dimension, and also because of the transnational dimension. Because as you are aware, the NRI's Sikh diaspora is, as from the beginning, supported the Andolan, particularly in countries such as Canada, the US, and the UK. So I am looking at that also. So my interest in the Andolan is, from a very specific angle. It's from the religious identity aspect and the transnational aspect. Okay. So before proceeding further, I wanted to apologize because I'm not going to present something, very well structured, very elaborate, or very detailed. Because actually, when I met Gurpreet long time back, 3 weeks back, we had in mind that I would present my research on Sikhs in France. Because I have, worked a lot on that, and I have a lot of things to say, and I think it also, is of interest for Sikhs in Chandigarh and in Punjab. But then, the news brought to the forefront the Andolan, and I think it was very good of Gurpreet to also suggest that instead of, talking about Sikhs in France, which I can do at a later stage, I should engage with you by presenting you the very, basic and preliminary research findings that I have. So don't expect anything grand or, it's going to be very basic. And, it's a challenge actually to present something about, the Andolan, about Sikhs, in front of an audience who is actually more knowledgeable than I am. So usually I am presenting those data, or I am writing for either a French audience or English-speaking audience in the West. So I have to explain everything, obviously. But here you are probably more knowledgeable than I am. But anyhow, I think I will try my best. And what I am hoping is that, whatever little bit of information and insight I am providing, you will add to it and ask questions after that. So before proceeding, I would like briefly to tell you about the outcome of that research. So I have been conducting a few interviews in December, Jan, then March in Singhu, and very recently in Tikri. And what is going to be the outcome, in terms of publication? So actually, I am working with a PhD student who happens to be my son. We are working, the two of us, on an edited book. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about that book. So this book is comprising, it's in the process, it's not completed yet, but we have sent a book proposal to a publisher, English-speaking publisher, and the book comprises some of the papers that were presented at an online conference that was held in Jindal in May. So basically, the point of that book is to look through a multidisciplinary perspective at the Andolan, and to study the historical, social, and religious roots of the movement. Study also its unique blend of Marxism, Sikhism, popular culture of resistance. Looking also at how the Andolan is part of larger debates, right? Long struggles on the agrarian question, as a form of resistance. Also, it can also be understood as a form of resistance against corporatization of agriculture. But also, if we look at it from a political angle, it can be looked at as a form of resistance and dissent against authoritarian populism and Hindu majoritarianism. So, what are the questions we are planning to address in that book through the contributions from 15 to 20 authors? We are going to look at how, if we can draw a comparison between this Andolan, this movement, and previous resistance and contestation movements in India, as well as globally. We are going to explore the role played by regional, religious, as well as caste and gender identities in the movement. We are going also to analyze, identify the tools, the patterns of mobilization, used by the protesters and what we consider as the transformative potential of the Andolan. So basically, the book is at the intersection of three research fields. Obviously, agrarian studies, which is the specialization of that co-author of mine, the field of the sociology of social movements, and third field, Punjab and Sikh studies, which is my field. So that's what is ahead. Let me go very quickly through the different, sections of the book. So we have a section introducing the agrarian question in India. We also have a next section on agrarian crisis and capitalism in Punjab. So that's a political economy section on Punjab agrarian structure. Then we have another section on the role played by caste, class, and gender in the movement. Another section of the book will be focusing on the role of media, which is a crucial one, and two Punjabi journalists, Gurshamshir and Amandeep Sandhu, will be writing a chapter on that. Another section on religion, radical politics, and diaspora mobilization. And the final concluding chapter would consist of interviews with union leaders, activists, and artists. So that's what is going to keep us busy for the next few months. So now I'll come to what has been a little bit my research focus on this Andolan. So I told you I am looking at Sikhi, the role of Sikhi in the Andolan as a major source of inspiration, as a tool of mobilization for the protests, by providing very potent symbols, by providing a pool of heroic figures drawn from Sikh history, but also from the anti-colonial struggle. So basically, I am trying to understand how Sikh ethos is a driving force in this movement, in this social movement, through religious institutions and practices such as langar, through the notion, the concept of chardikala, and the sanctity of agricultural labor. So maybe I'll start with telling you a little bit about my theoretical framework. Because that's what we use in the social sciences, conceptual tools and theoretical framework. So far it's not very elaborate, it's a bit primitive, but I have to work on that a little bit. So I think I will probably borrow my conceptual tools from sociology, although I am an anthropologist, but they are sister disciplines anyhow. So from sociology of religion and from the sociology of social movement. So basically, I'm going to look at the intersection between social movements and the role played by faith and by religion. And interestingly, it's a relatively unexplored research topic. I mean, there have been a few publications that have looked from the 1990s onwards at the role played by religion, by faith, in several contemporary social and political movements. It is understudied, so for example, before telling you why it is understudied, the social movement I have in mind in the West that have been studied under that theoretical framework, we can name, for example, liberation theology in South America that intersected Marxism and Christianity. We can also have in mind the civil rights movement, where obviously religion has played in the US, where religion has played a major role. We can also think about Solidarność in Poland. So that's, important social movements in the West. And if we look at India and South Asia as a whole, there is a much longer history actually of, social and religious movement in the subcontinent, starting as early as the Bhakti movement, with figures such as Guru Nanak or Kabir and so on. So India has a long history as well of how religion can play a liberating and a progressist role. So, just briefly to define what is a social movement. So, a social movement is a collective and organized effort to change laws. So that's a case in point. Collective and organized effort to change laws, policies, or practices by a group of people who share common interests, but who do not have the power to do so through conventional political channels. So they do it, those people who share common interests, they will do it outside the sphere of established politics, of established political institutions. So it's beyond the sphere of political parties, voting system, parliament, and government. So as I was saying, the role of religion has tended to be ignored by specialists of social movements. The reason is related to the history of, the discipline of sociology, how much it draws from Marxism, and it's also related to the classic Marxist understanding of religion as false consciousness, as you are aware, and as a false alternative to collective political action. Okay, so that's the general frame of mind, which has been very prevalent in the study of social movement. And this has, this explains why the importance, the role played by religion and faith has been understudied so far. So according to that view, religion only makes the oppressed classes accept their oppression, while political radicalism, revolution, urges them to question the status quo and an oppressive political system. So obviously, it's a lot more complex than that, and I think some of the movement that India has witnessed in the recent history, particularly the Andolan, helps to complexify, to nuance that dichotomy between, on the one side, religion as an oppressive or conservative force, and on one side, radical politics. So this understanding has completely changed with the study of what has been termed the new social movements that emerged in the 60s and 70s. I will not go into the details of that. So now there is a body of research, emerging body of research on social and religious movements. And I will try very briefly to highlight some of the key findings of that body of research. So, for instance, they have highlighted that social and religious movements can be a source of empowerment, okay, spiritual as well as political empowerment. So, this notion of empowerment that you are familiar with and that we can define as the capacity of people to intervene directly in problems they are concerned with, and to define, and to decide their collective and individual destiny. So this notion of empowerment that is, related to, that is a result of those social and religious movements. This notion of empowerment is, I think, very important to interrogate in the context of the Andolan. So, what are the groups that took part in the Andolan that have been or that have strived to be empowered by it? So we might think about, globally speaking, one of the reasons, if we frame it as, a movement that is related to a search of empowerment, okay? So we might be thinking in terms of the farmers who joined the Andolan. One major motive behind the Andolan was the protest of farmers against laws that they perceived would disempower them. Okay, so we can frame that Andolan as a struggle against disempowerment, because it would deprive them of their land and livelihood. And then secondly, we can look at, as I was saying, empowerment and what kind of groups would be empowered, or at least would seek some form of empowerment as part of the Andolan. So obviously, one of the major group that was probably expecting to be empowered, and that was the backbone of the protest, the small and marginal farmers. Second group that, as you know, has been quite visible in the protest are women. And third group are Dalits and landless laborers. So we have, to question, and I have to question this notion of empowerment as applied to those three groups. So the issue is not only empowerment within the movement, but whether this Andolan will empower those groups on the long term. Once the Andolan is, finished, and that's apparently very soon, once everybody goes back home, what would be the long-term effect of the Andolan, if any, and that's something we discuss on Monday. What will be the long-term effects of the Andolan on the patriarchal and casteist social fabric of Punjab? So that's empowerment as, something, a key term in the study of social and religious movement. Another key term would be, if we look at post-1970s social movement worldwide, another characteristic and key term is the global scope. So globalization, okay? They are global, most of them are global in scope, in effects, in actions, and in practices. So here again, the Andolan is, a very interesting case study because it has a very regional dimension, Punjab, Haryana, Western UP. It is related to the specificities of agriculture and agricultural markets there, but it also has some national ambitions and purposes, and it has a global dimension. So I told you about the participation, the support provided by the diaspora with transnationalizing the movement. That's one thing, but it also has, this Andolan is global in the sense that it addresses a crucial issue that is of interest to us all on the planet, such as food security, such as the economic sustainability of small-scale family farming against corporate-driven agriculture. So this Andolan is really global in those various senses. This is also global because it relates, so I'm not clear yet how it has established or not connections with, there is this international organization of small peasant farmers called Via Campesina. So I'm not clear if there has been formal connections or not, but you must have seen, Facebook videos and photos taken of, I remember the latest I saw was Brazilian farmers, small farmers supporting the Andolan. But whatever formal connection they are at least a commonality of issues. So these issues, the sustainability, economic sustainability of small-scale farming, food security and sovereignty, and so on, these issues have been at the core of the struggle fought by this international organization of small peasants, Via Campesina, that defends peasant agriculture, food security as a way to promote social justice, dignity, and sustainability of agricultural work. So there is definitely a common ground between those various protests, organizations, and mobilization at a global scale. So what is important also to look at is how much the Andolan, the Kisan Andolan, is part of much larger debates, much larger and very important struggles at the global level. And I think people here, but also people internationally, are well aware of that. So let me now come to what I have done so far. So I have been looking, for instance, at the centrality of language. So let me talk to you about it a little bit. So centrality of the language, it's very visible, very obvious, so there is no need for much, elaboration. But what I found interesting is the centrality of the language plays at different levels. So if we start at a very practical level, to sustain a movement on such a long period, at a very basic level, you need to feed the protesters. Okay. So at a practical level, Langer, filled that very urgent need. But there is also a symbolic and obviously spiritual dimension of Langer. So at the symbolic level, Langer reasserts the importance of farming, of food production. It also, makes visible the connection between farming, food protection, and the food we cook and eat. Also, what is very striking with Langer in the protest and more globally is the inclusiveness of Langer. Okay, so the fact that people are feeding, the protesters were feeding everyone, irrespective of social, religious, and caste background. And obviously, this resonates with the religious dimension of Langer, and since, as you was meant as an egalitarian and anti-caste institution. So I am also looking at this, religious, spiritual aspect of Langer, which I think is very important, and to connect that dimension with the other dimension. So I see Langer as a multi-dimensional practice in the protest. And if we look at the religious, spiritual aspect, as you know, Guru Nanak insisted on the high value of manual work, particularly of agricultural labor. So he was tilling his own fields for the past 17 years of his life. And you also know better than I do the fact that the Adigaran contains many images, references, metaphors of cultivation, harvests, and about the beauty of nature. So this is something I am trying to connect with the symbolic also dimension of Langer in the context of that protest. So at a symbolic level, Langer actually metaphorically or symbolically points to a world where food is grown, food is prepared, served in common, not for profit, not for commercial profit, but to sustain the community and protect the earth. So I think it's a very powerful symbol, and it's also a very powerful reminder of the importance of food security and food sovereignty. So it's, many levels are there. Another level which I am very interested in, and that's something I talked yesterday with Santosh, who is here and who has been attending the protest in December. So the fact that cooking and serving food to anyone, irrespective of, as I said earlier, social, religious, caste background, is political. Okay, it's spiritual, it's humanitarian, whatever you call it, but I think it is also a very powerful act of protest, particularly in the political environment of India, which is so divisive, constantly targeting minorities and so on. So I think Langer has opened up in a very important way, new spaces of solidarities, bridging with various sections of society, well beyond farming section. And finally, at a final level, although I'm sure there are many more levels of Langer that I haven't explored yet, but the one that was very strong, I think, is the transformative dimension of cooking together, serving food, eating together. So Santosh was telling me how it has been very important for her experience of the protest, how, by serving food, she was made part of the protest. And by feeding the local, the visitors, the supporters that used to visit a lot in December and January, less so afterwards, but how the farmers Langer made those people part of the protests and how it has established a very strong, almost intimate bond between the farmers and those visitors. So it's the bond of shared food, which is, typically anthropological topic of study. So I have to explore that. I was thinking to relate that to the symbolic and religious meaning of prashad. So I have to work on that a little bit more. So these reflections, explorations around langar in the context of the protest are actually part of wider research I have in mind on Seva. Okay, I'm not going to talk about that now, but I have been thinking, I have been struck, by the very important role that Seva is playing in Sikh social and religious life. And I have explored that for some years in the diaspora context, so in the UK and in France. And I was thinking to also look into it in the Indian context. So finally, I would like to say a few words about the notion of Chardikala. Because I think it has been very important to sustain the protest despite all the odds that the farmers have faced. So I haven't read much in a social science framework about Chardikala. It's a very interesting notion, actually. People have usually, when the comparison is drawn with Western context, the psychological concepts that is usually compared with Chardikala is that of resilience. Okay, so resilience has become, a very fashionable, very prevalent in psychology, and it can be defined as the ability of groups and individuals to bounce back, to maintain their core functioning, and to adapt positively in the face of adversity. So basically, I think my limited understanding of Chardikala, I think Chardikala is a richer notion than resilience, and is a more dynamic concept than resilience. Because, as you know, it refers to that state of mind of relentless optimism, the aspiration also to maintain that optimism, that spirit, and it implies something which is not in resilience, in the concept of resilience. It also implies dedication to and contentment with God's will during times of adversity. What also is very particular about the Sikh notion of Chardikala is its very strong collective aspect that was very visible in the farmers' protest. And the dynamic side is that it's not something innate. You are not born with Chardikala, what I understand of it, but this is something you have to achieve through practice, through prayers. So I thought it's something I have to work on. I don't have much so far to present you, but that's a notion I want to interrogate and further. So I was telling you that I haven't come across much conceptualization, outside of the theological literature, but in social sciences I haven't read much about Chardikala. However, it has been used repeatedly in the US, in the post 9/11 US context, to describe Sikh response to hate crimes, supremacist violence, and so on. So, if you are familiar with US Sikh prominent figures such as Simranjit Singh, he has written quite a lot about his experience of growing and as a turban Sikh in the US, and he has been using a lot this notion of Chardikala, which he translates and elaborates as resilience. And to him, so in some of his writings for the American press and for blogs and so on, so he has started using him and other American Sikhs have started to use this notion of Chardikala, this concept of Chardikala, to refer to how Sikhs respond individually and collectively to challenges, more particularly to situations of state repression, violence, and so on, and how they deal with loss and pain. So they were, for example, in quite an interesting article, he was explaining how Chardikala as a concept and as a practice has empowered and helped him to overcome traumatic events. And another writer, a PhD student, American Sikh PhD student, was also explaining that she sees Chardikala as a call to action. So, according to her, it's productive because it allows people to move on. And it involves both communal strength and personal reliance. So, I've been looking at how, and I want to work on how Chardikala as a concept, as a practice, has been a driving force in the protests, both at individual and collective level. So I cannot tell you much more, but I am in the thinking about conducting more interviews and interrogating that notion. So now, very briefly, the other aspects I am interested in, I will not elaborate much about them because, as I told you, it's very much a work in progress. So, I'm interested in looking at how the protest, the movement, well, whatever we call it, the Andolan, has developed its own rituals, its own symbols, based on a mix of socialist, Marxist, and Sikh references. So the flags of leftist unions, the presence of Sikh organizations such as Khalsa aids setting up tents, religious rituals being conducted on the protest sites, the Sikh religious slogans being very prominent during the speeches on stage. I am also looking at the iconography of the protest, so the very rich, images, posters, the icons that are displayed everywhere in Singhu and in Tikri. These, icons of dissent, of deviance that inspired the farmers. And beyond the farmers, I think inspiration goes beyond the farmer. So looking at, the iconography of the protest and which historical figures are there as, an inspiration for the farmers. So including Guru Nanak, including Banda Singh Bahadur, including the leaders of past peasant struggles such as Ajit Singh, including also heroes of the anti-colonial and revolutionary struggles such as Bhagat Singh, but also Dr. Ambedkar, although he was not as prominent as as in the anti-CA protest, but still he was there, and so on. So looking at the iconography, also looking at the series of commemorative events that the Morcha has organized. So Santosh was telling me yesterday about the very big event she and a group of students from Chandigarh University organized in mid-January, where for one full day they managed the stage, and it was to celebrate not Women's Day, but something. I forgot what was it to celebrate. You tell us. So I'm looking at these commemorative events, organized by the movement. So the one I was just mentioning, the May Day symbolizing the working class struggles, the Guru Ravidas Jayanti, Dr. Ambedkar Jayanti, and so on, and how they, these events, commemorative events, how this iconography is, has succeeded has helped the Andolan to put across their message that the Andolan is not just about farming, laws. It's not just about farmers. It's part of a larger struggle for equality, social justice, empowerment of all citizens. So that's another thing I want to look at. Secondly, I also want to look at the experiential aspect. Does it make sense in English, or am I just making up a word? Experiential aspect of the movement. What has been, the intimate, personal experience of the movement for the protesters, for those who participated at the protest sites, the farmers across generations, the women, obviously, particularly rural women who are usually confined to the domestic sphere. And also another very interesting aspect to explore is the experience by the youth of that movement, and the lessons learned by the youth who took part either directly or online. I have interviewed a few people, a few youngsters in the UK, and they were extremely involved in organizing rallies there. So what are the lessons for the next generation? How a new generation of youth activists has emerged from the movement. So this aspect could be termed as the transformative dimension of the struggle. Okay? And finally, something I am also very interested in is looking at how the protests has opened up new spaces of solidarity. So this is related to this earlier work I had done on Sikh minority status and their response to Hindutva. So I will be looking, and I have started looking at, new spaces of solidarity opened up by this protest, particularly in relations to other minorities, amongst other Muslims, and Muslims' support to the protests, and so on. So that's all for me. Thank you.